Rick had never known a life without the sound of medicine bottles clinking in a kitchen cabinet or the hollow cough of an old woman in the next room. His mother's sickness moved through their days like a shadow, soft but always there, whispering that one day, the house would be too quiet to bear. He learned to measure her pills by feel alone, to press a spoon to her lips when her hands trembled too badly to lift it herself. He wiped the cold sweat from her forehead in nights that seemed endless, listening to her mutter half-formed prayers to a God she was never sure would answer. Most mornings, Rick woke before dawn and paused at her door, watching her fragile chest rise and fall beneath a blanket that smelled of antiseptic and cheap soap. He told himself he'd keep her alive. He'd stay awake forever if he had to. He believed it. Until the day he found her slumped in the hallway, lit only by a flickering bulb overhead, a pistol gripped so tight in her small hand it looked fused to her bones. Her lips moved around verses half-remembered from childhood sermons. Words stumbled out in broken gasps. She stared through him, seeing something behind his shoulder that he would never find the courage to turn and face. For a moment, Rick forgot how to breathe. He stepped closer, a whisper on his tongue begging her to drop it, to let him help one more time, to just hold on until the morning when maybe she'd forget this idea altogether. She looked at him, eyes clearer than they had been in months. She smiled, tired, sad, apologetic for what she was about to take from him. Before he could speak, she pressed the barrel beneath her chin, closed her eyes, and the thunder inside that small hallway left him standing alone in a silence so heavy he thought it would crush him where he stood. After that, the house was too quiet, just as he'd feared. No prayer drifted from the bedroom door. No cough in the night to remind him someone needed him. All that remained was Rick, a man with hands that still remembered how to care, but no one left to save. Rick carried the silence like a chain around his throat. Every job he tried to hold on to slipped through his fingers. Too slow, too late, too desperate. He drifted from site to site, hoping each foreman would see the strength still left in his arms and not the emptiness behind his eyes. But no one did. By the time the city bus rattled him home each night, there was nothing in his pockets but lint and excuses. Jeremy was the last door he hadn't worn out yet. Old friend, old drinking buddy, old witness to all the times Rick promised he'd fix himself. Jeremy saw him coming before he even knocked, and let him in with that familiar laugh, halfway between mockery and pity. By morning, Rick had a spot on the next construction project, no questions asked. He showed up late. He always showed up late these days. A foreman's glare pinned him to the dirt like an insect. Rick kept his head down and worked until his hands split open again, until the roar of drills drowned out the hum in his skull that never left him alone. When the wound opened across his palm, the sting snapped him out of that drift. In the garden nearby, past the fresh lumber and mud, a woman stood perfectly still, Antoinette. She watched him the way one might watch a stray dog approach the back steps. He asked for something to wrap the bleeding skin. She didn't flinch. Told him it was just a scratch, that water would fix it if he cared enough to get back to work. He found a hose behind the main house. Cold water bit into the cut. Behind him, a servant murmured in Antoinette's ear. She turned her eyes on him like ice pressed to the spine. One sharp gesture sent the servant inside and Rick back toward the gate, shame burning deeper than the cut on his palm. Inside the house, through a sliver of an open door, he glimpsed wealth laid out casual as crumbs for pigeons. Silver frames, paintings that looked older than the city itself, and on a polished table, a careless stack of banknotes thick enough to choke a man's hunger for a week. His feet betrayed him. The bills were cool and smooth between fingers cracked from digging trenches and hauling concrete. He told himself he would return it, or repay it, or anything at all to make the lie taste sweeter on his tongue. The sound of leather soles behind him felt like a thunderclap. Drayton stood there, older than mold, older than the dust in his marble halls, staring with eyes that made Rick's spine want to bow. Antoinette hovered nearby, a storm held in human skin. She promised him ruin. Promised him that this city would spit him out as a thief and a beggar both. Rick begged. He felt each word crack like old floorboards in his throat. He blamed the morning, the thieves who took the last of his money, the long walk with nothing but shame to keep him company. Drayton only smiled. Not kind. Not cruel. Just amused. He held out the entire stack Rick had tried to steal, and more. Told him to take it, use it, be warm and full for once in his wretched life. Rick stumbled out into the dusk, the weight of the money dragging down the pocket of his torn jeans. Somewhere behind him, the old house watched, windows like eyes that never closed. The money felt heavier than stone in Rick's pocket. Each time he touched it, he remembered the creak of the old house behind him, the hush of Antoinette's cold eyes judging him from a shadowed doorway. He told himself he'd use it wisely. He told himself he deserved it. Lies taste sweet when you starve long enough. Nights with Jeremy blurred into each other. Cheap beer, warm laughs that hid old resentments, and Rick always trying to keep the shame tucked under his tongue. Jeremy laughed too loudly at Rick's dreams. Dinners in places where wine cost more than a month's rent, silk sheets, maybe even winning back the girl who once said she'd never leave him. Jeremy called him a fool for dreaming so soft. A coward who never finished what he started. That was why the city chewed him up and spit him out, why Rick's hands still stung with cuts and dirt even when he held more money than he ever had before. Morning brought no mercy. Rick and Jeremy argued about concrete pours and steel beams, half-hearted plans that would crumble under the weight of Rick's excuses. Before Rick could vanish into work, a shadow crossed the dusty ground. Antoinette's voice cut through the morning chatter. She wanted him to come back. Inside Drayton's office, the air smelled like old books and polished wood. The old man sat beneath a painting of a storm, the kind that swallowed ships whole. He spoke gently, words dripped with regret about the family he never had, the cold echo of empty rooms waiting for footsteps that would never come back. He asked Rick if he believed in God. Once, maybe. Before. Drayton confessed that once he too mocked faith, but now the weight of age pressed against his bones, and fear bled into every prayer he whispered in secret. Then came the offer, a single meal, prepared from what was left of Drayton's own flesh after death. One supper, one act of devotion, and every fortune the old man hoarded would pass to Rick's trembling hands. Rick laughed it off at first. His stomach turned cold at the thought. Madness whispered between the curtains in that dark office. Drayton's eyes gleamed wet and pleading. Only Rick could be trusted to carry this final wish into the grave and beyond. He left the house with his pulse drumming like a trapped moth in his chest. That night, Jeremy's friends filled their shabby living room with noise, spilled beer, and slurred arguments. Rick sat alone, watching the door, hoping she would appear, and then she did. Tanya. Same quiet smile, same warmth he once thought could fix everything. They didn't speak long. Jeremy dragged her away, too drunk to keep his rage bottled up. He mocked Rick in front of everyone, called him the same old failure. Rick sat there, humiliated and small, his eyes locked on the pistol on the shelf. He imagined one final breath, one sharp flash, and an end to hunger and shame. Instead, he turned away from the gun and wept into his own callous palms, begging a ceiling that never answered him back. The first bite nearly turned his stomach inside out. Rick sat at the edge of a carved wooden chair in a dining room that smelled of candles, ancient wood polish, and something metallic he couldn't name. Around him, the old house creaked with hidden memories and secrets thick as dust. Drayton's body lay not far, dressed, arranged, draped in silks, as if sleep might still claim him one more time. On his chest, porcelain dishes balanced like offerings on an altar built from human ruin. Antoinette stood behind him, her eyes fixed on Rick's trembling hands. A servant lifted a silver dome, revealing the first course. It looked harmless. It smelled seasoned. Rick forced it down, every chew scraping the back of his throat raw. He stared at the wall, at the flicker of candlelight, at anything except the shape under the silk that used to be a man who offered him everything. Dish after dish arrived. Warm flesh hidden under sauces he could not pronounce. Vegetables roasted alongside secrets he didn't want to learn. Somewhere inside him, something broke open, and each swallow pushed the pieces deeper until he wondered if they would ever come back whole. Antoinette's calm voice reminded him there could be nothing left behind. Every last morsel must be gone, or the fortune he tasted would rot before it ever touched his fingers. When the final plate was lifted from Drayton's bare chest, Rick caught his own reflection in the polished silver, a pale ghost with red-rimmed eyes and a mouth that no longer felt human. He pushed the last bite past numb lips and let the taste crawl down his throat like poison disguised as mercy. She pressed a slip of paper into his shaking hand. A promise in ink and old blood. He was Drayton now, for better or worse. And somewhere in the corners of the room, the shadows shifted, as if the house itself laughed in a voice only he could hear. The wealth Rick claimed with every forced bite felt heavier than any debt he'd ever owed. The rooms of the mansion whispered around him now, voices trailing behind each footstep. Sleep turned to a battlefield. Each time his eyelids shut, he found himself submerged in cold water, shadows tugging at his limbs, twisted faces murmuring things he refused to understand. By day, he walked marble halls that had once belonged to Drayton. Servants bowed. Antoinette glided beside him with perfect calm, reminding him that all this was his now, the paintings older than his bloodline, the glass chandeliers glittering like icicles ready to fall. He touched none of it. At night, the visions pressed closer. His hands shook so badly he spilled whiskey on silk carpets that cost more than his mother's entire life had ever been worth. Sometimes he caught sight of her in reflections, not as she had been, but as she was that final moment in the hallway, lips moving in apology before thunder cracked the world in two. Desperation crawled back into his bones. The pills Antoinette offered dulled the edges, but he hated the numbness even more than the fear. When the ghost of Drayton's wife appeared, drenched, hair clinging to her pale face, eyes wide with endless blame, Rick could only collapse against the wall, choking on regret and confusion. One night, the visions forced him out of the house. He found himself pounding on the church doors until his fists split open again. Inside, he dropped to his knees, whispering confessions that had no shape, begging forgiveness for sins he couldn't name but felt bleeding from every pore. The priest watched him quietly, then spoke words that offered no relief. Forgiveness demanded knowledge of what to repent. Rick had none. Only horror and a debt he couldn't pay. Jeremy's voice on the phone dragged him back to reality. His old friend, breaking under the weight of his own ruin, begged for help. Rick brought him money, but the shadows followed, and in the corner of that filthy apartment, a shape flinched at Rick's approach. Panic made him pull the trigger before he could see the truth. Tanya's body fell where she had once stood beside him, the promise of a life they might have had dissolving in a single heartbeat. Blood soaked into the floorboards, mingling with the dirt and the lies. A silent driver whisked Rick away before he could collapse next to her. In the mansion, Antoinette waited, serene as always, reminding him that there was still one way out. One more meal, one more soul to carry the burden forward. Rick's mind bent under the weight of her words. He realized he no longer belonged to himself. Somewhere far below, a voice that sounded like his mother's told him to end it, or pass it on before the shadows tore him apart from the inside out. In the quiet that followed the blood and the gunshot, Rick felt every breath like a blade scraping his lungs. Antoinette found him collapsed on the marble floor of the foyer, face pale, pupils wide with terror. Her voice was calm, gentle as always, but each word dripped with the poison he could no longer ignore. He begged for a way out. Not mercy. He knew mercy was for the innocent, and innocence was a place he'd abandoned long ago. He needed escape, an end to the shadows that clawed at the walls and left wet footprints across his dreams. Antoinette explained that no man could outrun the debt once the first bite passed his lips. The wealth bound him to every sin that Drayton had hidden away and every sin Rick's own trembling hands had since added to the heap. There was no forgiveness left, only transfer, one soul stepping beneath the burden so the other could breathe again. Rick thought of Jeremy, loyal even when he shouldn't be. Broken, desperate, easy to lead. He hated himself for the thought but let it root anyway. Antoinette didn't judge. She only asked if he had the resolve to finish what he started. Jeremy arrived without suspicion, shoulders slumped, eyes red from secrets Rick already knew. He spoke of bad men, missing money, debts snapping at his heels. Rick listened, nodding at all the right pauses, the guilt in his chest hardening into a stone too heavy to lift. Antoinette stepped forward, hands clasped like a priest about to bless a sacrifice. She explained the ritual with the same cool patience she'd used to offer pills and half-truths. Jeremy heard every word but seemed to drift through it, lost in the promise of rescue that had always hung over Rick like a curse in disguise. When the time came, Rick lay back on polished oak, heartbeat drumming out the last of his defiance. The doctor's needle found his vein, silence swelled in his ears. He thought of water. He thought of Tanya's smile before fear soured it forever. He thought of a mother whispering sorry before leaving him behind in a world that knew only hunger. Darkness gathered him up like a child too tired to keep crying. In a place deeper than dream, the faces waited, some he recognized, some he feared to name. They pressed close, cold breath against his neck, until another shape moved through them. His mother's shadow, shielding him one last time. He woke gasping in sheets damp with sweat, lungs burning, vision filled with Antoinette's patient face. She told him what he already guessed. Jeremy had done it. He had eaten the price of Rick's freedom. Somewhere in the mansion, the echoes of Jeremy's first screams curled down the empty halls like smoke. Outside, the world carried on, blind to the new names scratched into the hidden ledger of the damned. Rick was free. And free meant nothing but emptiness, wearing a man's skin. Months slipped through Rick's hands like water he could never cup tight enough to hold. The mansion, once a cage of marble and whispers, stood behind him now, locked away with its secrets, its ghosts, and the echoes of a name that no longer belonged to him. He found work on a modest construction crew outside the city limits. Mornings brought him splinters instead of silk, sunburn instead of polished banquets. Each bruise and cut felt real in a way that the riches never did. No more Antoinette at his shoulder, no more Antoinette at his ear. Just wind and dust and the weight of muscle on bone, the honest kind that didn't need to hide in prayer or contract. Sometimes, on lunch breaks, he sat alone beneath the rustle of a park's oldest tree. Sandwich in hand, callous palms resting on his knees, he stared through the branches at a sky that seemed too wide for the life he once tried to buy. Not far off, shadows lingered. The air around him felt thick when he closed his eyes, as if the mansion's rotting heart had followed him in a shape only he could feel. Tanya's phantom took the empty spot beside him on the bench some days, quiet and patient, her eyes wet with an accusation he never dared answer. He never flinched anymore when she appeared. Guilt calcified into a truth too old to grieve. Behind the grand walls he left behind, another voice now screamed through the corridors. Jeremy's voice, that laughter long gone sour, that dreamer caught in the same trap Rick once believed was salvation. Antoinette still moved through those halls with the grace of a keeper who would never unlock the door. Rick never looked back. He carried the taste of Drayton's final meal in a memory he would not confess, not even in prayer. He ate alone, worked alone, and when the wind was right, he swore he heard the click of a pistol, his mother's whisper drifting from a past so deep no absolution could dig it free. He told himself he was free. Some days he almost believed it.
If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this one. Thank you for watching.